So, here we are, finally at the end of the original trilogy. It only took 3 years to get here. Obviously, Star Wars was massively successful and in many ways changed cinema, not only with its impressive effects work, but the idea of what kind of stories you could tell in the sci-fi fantasy format. The second film had a bigger budget and pushed everything even further, and surprise surprise was a huge hit, making more than quadruple its budget. But many things were left unfinished, and all the fans were still eagerly waiting for the final part of this story. Thus we were given Return of the Jedi. Initially Revenge of the Jedi, but that's a whole other story. The film opens with us seeing a new Death Star in construction, even bigger than the last, with an Imperial shuttle entering. Just by hearing the music and seeing the stressed look on all the faces of the officers, we know exactly who's coming down from that shuttle. Once Darth Vader makes his way, he is not happy, and emphasises that the Emperor is not nearly as forgiving. Which, given what Darth Vader did to one of his own officers in the last film, really gets you wondering just how bad could the Emperor be. After this, we're greeted with two familiar faces and a familiar location. After the events of the last film, C-3PO and R2-D2 are sent to meet with Jabba in an attempt by Luke to rescue Han. Once they get there, a large door is keeping anyone from entering, along with extreme security. This makes it very clear just how big a deal Jabba is when he has this big of a home and this much protection. It's very clear that this isn't going to be an easy mission. After this, Jabba the Hutt is finally revealed to us. He isn't just a man, but instead a giant, fat, slug-like creature. The puppet used for this scene is very impressive, and I don't think Jabba is what anyone would have expected. I can't begin to imagine what audiences would have thought when they were seeing him for the very first time. Jabba's palace is also a very interesting location, full of criminals and bounty hunters along with bands and drinks. It's kind of a more extreme version of the cantina from the first film, only reinforcing the kind of place that Tatooine is. And of course, one of Jabba's closest bounty hunters is once again present, with Boba Fett watching from the distance, being a very mysterious character, just like last time. C-3PO and R2-D2 are handed over to Jabba as a peace offering in exchange for Han. Obviously, C-3PO isn't too happy to discover this knowledge, and the plan doesn't quite go how they had hoped, as Han is rather a prized possession to Jabba. The droids in the palace are also different to any we've seen prior. They're a lot more worn and torn in a sense, and their movement is much more clunky in comparison to C-3PO, which I think was a nice touch to re-emphasise just how rough this place is. And we also learn the horrible fate of anyone or anything that disappoints Jabba. A bounty hunter manages to get into Jabba's palace and makes an offer for Han, but it is completely rejected by Jabba. Of course, this bounty hunter is soon revealed to be Leia, when she rescues Han from the carbonite freezing. Yet the plan is a fail, as Jabba was completely onto them the whole time, which is what leads to quite a controversial moment in the film, with Jabba claiming Leia for his own and forcing her into the famous metal bikini. I think people had a problem with this because they felt it was George Lucas blatantly objectifying Leia, which you can understand when you just look at it. But when you contextualise the scene, it's very clear that Jabba is the one objectifying her in the same way he objectifies everyone, and I feel it's just showing how slimy of a character he really is. Luke soon comes for the rescue, but is trapped with the famous Rancor, a giant man-eating beast. After Luke survives this, it ends up with Jabba taking all of the prisoners to the famous Sarlacc pit, where if caught they will be slowly consumed over many years, which is just the most horrible thing to imagine happening. The Sarlacc pit is like a Venus flytrap for people, and it's definitely one of the most creative ideas to be put in Star Wars. It's all okay though, because Luke and the others all have a plan. After this, the crew make their way up to a rebel base in an attempt to plan out how they will destroy this new Death Star before even more destruction is brought to the galaxy. Whilst there, Han and Lando are reunited. One little criticism I do have about this is that we never see the two of them having to regain trust. After what Lando did in the last film, Han was angry, and rightfully so, but all we get is them just back as friends exactly how they were when they met up in the last film. I understand that there was a lot to finish and get through in this film, but it just doesn't feel quite as natural as it should. The plan to blow up the Death Star is explained to us by the famous Admiral Akbar. He's a race of alien we've not seen before, just showing the massive scope of this universe. The main crew are tasked with going to Endor, a forest moon planet. We've already had an ice and desert planet, so it was only fitting we finally get a forest. The planet is inhabited by these tribal bear creatures called Ewoks, and I don't care what anyone says, Ewoks are amazing. The planet has been taken by the Empire, which leads me on to another thing this film introduces: scout troopers and speeder bikes. The speeder bikes were a really cool idea with these small vehicles that can go several hundred miles an hour, and this also makes them incredibly dangerous, which we see when Luke and Leia try to take them. This film also added in the AT-ST, a much smaller version of the AT-AT, with only 2 legs but much faster, and still very intimidating. The effect for them works really well, and it makes sense that the Empire would have these, as they're kind of a Star Wars equivalent to a tank. Another funny moment that happens on Endor is when the Ewoks start worshipping C-3PO, as they believe he is a god. It reveals what kind of a society they are and the kind of beliefs they hold. It's just very funny, especially when 3PO refuses to tell them to release the others because of his programming. The best part of this film, however, in my opinion, is the throne room with the Emperor. The Emperor was recast for this film with Ian McDiarmid. Whilst I'm not a huge fan of when films do this, I feel it was strongly for the best in this film. McDiarmid just took the role and made it his own. He took this fairly standard character and made him into someone memorable, by giving him this dark, sinister voice, and also giving the Emperor this sick sense of humour. The makeup used for him was brilliant as well, and it's rather strange that the makeup looks better in this film than all the following appearances. Darth Vader was angry and devastated when Luke decided to take death rather than join him to rule the galaxy. Therefore, he chose to bring him to the Emperor, so he could be turned and know the true power of the dark side. And Luke is being tested constantly by the Emperor, but Luke really does believe in his father and he trusts that there is still good in him. But even then, his patience is heavily tested. This film has the clearest form of good versus evil, and it really does feel like the climax we've all been waiting for. Another thing we learn in this film is that Leia is Luke's sister. I don't object to this in the grand scheme of things, but I'm going to be honest, when you look at the scene in the last film where she's making Han jealous, it's just very clear that George Lucas didn't plan this from the beginning. The characters, similar to last time, have all evolved and grown. Han is no longer the smuggler who shoots first and asks questions later. He now cares about more than that. Luke has completed his training and is now one with the Force. He's beyond anger and has reached acceptance. The romance between Han and Leia is obviously further developed again. There's no more arguing, although Han is concerned that perhaps Leia has feelings for Luke. Of course, that's not the case. The effects in this film are once again incredible. The Rancor in Jabba's palace looks amazing and very convincing, never standing out once as an effect. The ships and space battles are a visual spectacle. The set and costume design is brilliant and pulls you into the world of Star Wars. It's all positive except for one little thing. Early on in the film, there is some very noticeable blue screen, with the lighting looking clearly different, and the dreaded matte lines being present around all the actors. I'm honestly not entirely sure how this happened when there were no issues like this in either of the last films. I don't know if it was simply down to overambition. I know that ILM had a very hard time making this one and it really drained all of them. There's never a moment where you go, oh my god, that is just terrible, but you do notice it in those few moments, and you never did in the other two. The film is paced to perfection with a clear goal being in place, and just like the others, you're never checking your watch or waiting for it to finally be over, which in my mind is a sign of perfection and shows just how good George Lucas was when it came to the editing. He went with a lot of quick cut shots, and it just speeds up the whole pace of the film. The soundtrack is once again brilliant and fitting for every scene in the film. My personal favourite to come out of this one was the Emperor's theme, starting out with a choir deeply humming, giving you almost the feeling of what it's like to be inside the Emperor's mind, and gradually getting louder and more extreme the closer he comes to turning Luke. Vader's theme was the Imperial March, and it felt much more like the theme of a leader for an evil cause. This theme feels like pure evil and much more personal, fitting the Emperor perfectly. Overall, this is a really fun watch. For the longest time, if you had asked me what was my favourite film in the franchise, I would have said this one. I still love this film. I think the throne room includes some of the best moments in the whole franchise. This film made the Emperor. It's well paced, well executed, and the acting is all brilliant. It really does feel like a grand ending to an epic trilogy, leaving the galaxy in a good place. It's also one of the rare cases where I think I like the new ending a little bit more than the original, feeling like the proper ending to the saga. But Yub Nub will always be great. If you somehow haven't seen this film, then what are you doing to yourself? No one should deny themselves Star Wars. That's all I have to say about this film for now. Thank you to everyone who's stuck with me through all of these. I know it's been a while, and I guess the next thing is to talk about the prequels, but I don't know when I'll get to that. But I'll see all of you in the next review.